the uncertainty, also the understanding the lack of knowledge is actually what pushes us forward.
We need to know when it's not just a question of more experiment or more calculation, but also a question of expanding or changing the conceptual schemes with which we look at things.
We know we have feelings and experiences, and yet our official scientific worldview tells us there's just electrochemical signaling in our heads.
Hello, and thanks very much for joining us for this debate, the known and the unknown. For much of human history, people have held firm beliefs about the nature of the world, but now a steep decline in religious belief, compounded by doubts about the possibility of objective truth, has left many in the West feeling profoundly lost. Should we welcome this new uncertainty and revel in the absence of a constricting set of beliefs? Or are we only now recognizing the limitations of the human condition, which our hubris once obscured or denied? Or must we escape from being lost, even if it means adopting illusory certainties in order to provide social identity, personal well-being, and purpose? And we have a very illustrious panel to discuss this theme. We have Renata Salecl, who's a philosopher and sociologist, and is currently a professor at Birkbeck College and at the Institute of Criminology in the Faculty of Law at the University of Ljubljana. And she was awarded the title Slovenian Woman Scientist of the Year in 2010, and her works include On Anxiety, The Tyranny of Choice, and forthcoming, A Passion for Ignorance. We also have philosopher and writer Philip Goff, who's an associate professor at Durham, and his research focuses on integrating consciousness into our scientific worldview. His book, Galileo's Error, was published in November last year and defends panpsychism as a solution to the problem of consciousness. And we also have Simon Blackburn, who's an emeritus professor of philosophy and fellow of Trinity College, Cambridge. And Simon is the author of many books, including Think and Mirror Mirror, The Uses and Abuses of Self-Love. So in a moment, I'll turn to each of our discussants with an opening provocation, a question, and I'll give them each 3 minutes to respond. Then we'll have a debate among the panel, very roughly divided into 3 sections, which I'll signal as we go along. And then we'll have a Q&A with the audience. So for our opening question, and I'll ask Renata Salecl to begin. Renata, should we embrace uncertainty for 3 minutes? Thank you.
Definitely. We can only ever embrace certain certainty. And it was already medieval philosopher, theologian, Nicholas de Cusa, who spoke about the necessity of understanding the limits of our knowledge. And his term, Docta Ignorantia, learned ignorance, was a very important kind of first reasoning about the necessity to sort of understand what cannot be known. In his case, he was mostly speaking about God, the infinite, and I think that this kind of a reasoning continues to our days. A few years ago, a very interesting book was published by American scientist Stuart Firestein called Ignorance, How It Drives Science. So the uncertainty, also the understanding the lack of knowledge, is actually what pushes us forward. On the individual level, psychoanalysts know now for more than 100 years that people claim rationally that they want to know, but actually they have a passion for not knowing, in a way, passion for ignorance, as Jacques Lacan, French psychoanalyst, said. But even more importantly, psychoanalysts would point out that when they encounter people who actually have certainty, who are lacking doubt, then they start to question whether they are maybe dealing with people who have a psychotic structure. So to have on a personal level, a question about yourself, who you are, what do you want, what do others say, might be, precisely the uncertainty to which we never find an answer. And, it is an uncertainty which might be painful, but it is also an engine of our drives, our desires, And it is an uncertainty which we need to learn how to live with.
Thanks very much, Renata. I'll now turn to Philip Goff for with the same question. Philip, should we embrace uncertainty?
Thanks. Well, actually, rather than living in a period of uncertainty, I actually think we're living through a period of false certainty. There is a popular narrative, very popular narrative, according to which for thousands of years, philosophers tried to speculate about the ultimate nature of reality, and then we discovered the scientific method, and the days of speculation ended. Now, I don't think anyone thinks we have all the answers, but I think many people think we know, with something close to certainty, the way to go about getting them, namely through the scientific method. I think this kind of scientism is in many ways the new religion. Now, the success of physical science for the last 400 years or so is phenomenal and rightly celebrated. But in my view, it has been so successful precisely because it focused on a quite limited task, roughly constructing mathematical models to describe, predict the behavior of matter. And there's just that's very useful, but there's lots of things I think we know to be real that just simply can't be fully accounted for in that way. Facts about consciousness, facts about maths and logic, facts about value and significance. Now, that's not the fault of physical science. It was never intended by people like Galileo for those purposes. But I think we're going through a period of history where people are so blown away by the success of science and the incredible technology it's produced that has such a visceral effect on you, that we become inclined to think that the story we get from physical science is a complete story of the whole of reality. And I think this leads to an incomplete and impoverished picture of reality. We know we have feelings and experiences, and yet our official scientific worldview tells us there's just electrochemical signaling in our heads. We know that human trafficking is objectively abhorrent, and yet our official worldview tells us we live in a valueless universe. And I think, if nothing else, I don't think this is not very good for our mental health. So I hope that as a society, we one day rediscover the importance of philosophy. The role of philosophy, in my opinion, is to take what we know from natural science, but also things we know to exist in other ways. Facts about consciousness, the reality of abstract objects, the reality of value, and to synthesize all these together in a single unified worldview. So I'm not sure that would take us to certainty, but I think it would remove a false certainty we currently live with and thereby bring us a little bit closer to the truth.
Thanks very much, Philip. And finally to Simon Blackburn with the same question. Should we embrace uncertainty, Simon?
Well, I'm happy to say that to some extent I agree with both of the previous speakers. I agree with Renata in saying that the impetus for science is ignorance. Nicholas de Cusa was absolutely right about that. And that we do well to embrace uncertainty, if only as a drive to inquiry. And it's the processes of inquiry which I think we should all admire, and those especially includes the processes of the very successful physical sciences. And those aren't just, I think, questions of mathematical models. I mean, if you think of science like geology, people used to think the world was 6,000 years old. We now know that it's something, well, the universe is something like 14 billion years old, and the Earth is 4 billion years old. So that's an increase in knowledge. It's not particularly an increase in a mathematical model, but it is an increase in the understanding of the uniformities of nature, which we see all around us, and which enable us to construct a timeline. And I think that's one of the great successes of physical science. But there are many, many others one could concentrate on. However, I do agree with Philip that we have to be careful about supposing that the methods of physical science will tell us everything we need to know. And I thoroughly agree that the methods of philosophy are needed. As a professional philosopher, I've got to say that. That is, we need to know when it's not just a question of more experiment or more calculation, but also a question of expanding or changing the conceptual schemes with which we look at things. However, I don't think that that is as radical as Philip perhaps hopes it is. There are many, many ways of trying to reconcile, for example, our knowledge of right and wrong with the physical world, with the conception of ourselves as physical animals. I think there are many ways of doing the same for mathematics itself and logic. And eventually, I think there's going to be ways of doing it for consciousness. The phrase, the hard problem of consciousness, has been much in the news, I think for no very good reason, because it's been there since Descartes. But I don't believe there is a hard problem of consciousness. I think the only hard problem in the area is stopping thinking that there's a hard problem of consciousness. So on that, I think I disagree with Philip.
To continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below. Or visit iai.tv for more debates and talks from the world's leading thinkers on today's biggest ideas.